Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's CC-Webinar.Live Keynote and Panel Discussion Session. And thank you for joining. We would also like to thank Experio for sponsoring today's session. Now, I would like to pass on the microphone to Eric to introduce the keynote speaker and later on to moderate the session. For audience, if you have any questions to our keynote speaker or our panelists, use the chat box option throughout the session. That's all from my side. Eric, over to you now.
Thank you very much, Laura, and I'm delighted on behalf of the Carry community to have keynote speaker Jean-Philippe Avalanche from Experio here with me, together with the panelists Aiden, Chris, Robert, and Bernard. So today we're going to discuss the digital transformation and building new technology, structures and business models, a mouthful. So we will start the session with the keynote presentation by Jean-Philippe from Experio, and afterwards we'll bridge this into an interactive panel session. So Jean-Philippe, bonjour, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will I'll share my screen. If everything is all right, then you should see the same as I do. So I think indeed a very interesting topic, a very broad topic. Let me see. Data-driven organization. So I think indeed it's always a very vague topic to talk about data. I said I always joke that it's a little bit like talking about security. It's well, always hard to know what to tell, especially in an audience like this, which I'm certain indeed has already a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge about how to bring topics like those in their own organization. So obviously, I won't insult anyone about trying to convince you about how much data are important. What I will rather try to do is to maybe talk a little bit more about the experience that we had at Experio when it comes to indeed making the organization more data-driven and making sure that at Experio we can take smarter decisions, but of course help our customers also do the same. I mean, data-driven means indeed taking decision based on data. And I think indeed a lot of the time we can rely on feelings, on opinions, on emotions to take decisions. And I think it's necessary in a certain industry to still rely on gut feeling. But sooner than later, at all levels of the organization, you will have to answer questions about developing to new markets, to hiring certain applicants, to making discount for your customers, and more than ever, relying on facts and being able to systematically rely on those facts is indeed what make organization more data-driven. So I think indeed data is completely part of the digital transformation of organizations. It's completely part of it, and being data-driven is, hence the title for me, making a smarter decision. I would like to start just by maybe demystifying this whole big data definition. It was a big buzz topic. I think it is still to a certain extent. But what we really saw also at Experio is that big data is not about handling bigger volume of data. It's not about the technical challenge to handle a lot of data, but very much about making sure that you derive value from data you already have and the one that you're still creating, and that's you can integrate third-party source of data and in a reliable and systematic way analyze and derive intelligence from it in a way that you can make decisions. Obviously, in certain industries, talking about Spotify, of course, they master the art of doing the same, but at a much bigger level. But in a way, like anything, you need to start learning to walk before indeed you can scale it up. And ultimately, big data is nothing than doing the same simple thing and scaling it at a bigger model. Now, what is this simple thing? I think it did. What helped us a lot is to understand the simple capabilities that are required when we deal with data. A lot of the time, we look in organization, the technical people that crunch data and try to aggregate them, is really the tech-savvy people. They are indeed able to collect data and create database and start linking them together. But if it is not complemented by a team that has what we call more data fluency, that is able to look at those data, look at those information, and start learning how to present it in a way that, well, it simplifies it, that we can start deriving intelligence, business intelligence out of it, then obviously those data are not used and won't be valuable. But what we obviously mainly notice is that the most difficult part of that cycle that we usually lack is how to make sure that the entire organization does become more literate about relying and using those intelligence, those insights that are produced, let's say, by the BI team or by the people that produce those data. I think a lot of the time, indeed, we create a BI team, they produce a lot of reports, but we fail to invest enough in making sure that the entire organization start looking systematically about those information that are being produced, and that we close the loop, that we go back to the technical people, we go back to the fluent people that are able to create these insights, to tell them that was useful, but these are the next steps, or these are the additional information that we could link, and this part of the organization is indeed at every level, ensuring that everyone consume and look at the same way at data and learn to use those data to make those decisions. Now, taking those three capabilities, I mean, when we look on internet about, you could Google indeed, how do we become a data-driven organization? Obviously, we'll fall into the machine learning, into the artificial intelligence, into how much you need to start giving training to your management team. I mean, there are obviously a different level of maturity and different way to approach it. Taking the same capabilities that I pointed out and looking at the journey that we've had at Experio, I think we can summarize it indeed in those three steps. What we ensured is that any of those data sources are systematically put together in what we call at Experio our data ocean. Why it's important? It breaks the silos. Each department, each person in the organization has been used to rely on their report, on their way to extracting data, on their way to make their pivot table and make decisions on it. Or indeed, they have their own database isolated for their own needs. Unless you put them together at that data ocean level, and that indeed you start modeling and correlating those data, make sure that indeed there is only one list of customers, there's only one list of orders or sites, and that everyone start looking at the same correlated data and derive and analyze those data in a way that we can start experimenting more with taking insight out of those data. So it's not about experimenting at technical level, it's really about experimenting at more, I would say, business level to make decisions out of this. And by exploring, by experimenting, quickly understand what will have a value and make sure that is automated in a way that you can, without any effort on a daily basis, produce the exact same extract of that information. And last but not least, broadcast to the wider audience possible within the organization, so that everyone starts looking at the same view, at the same information, and any meeting or any decision that needs to be taken, that you can take back that reference and say, yesterday we took a decision based on that fact. If we look at it today, we can see the effect of the decision that we took. And I think indeed, beyond all the fancy other initiatives that you can take around data, we figured out that those basic principles and those 3 different layers are the key to systematically drive towards a data-driven culture. Now, at Expero, obviously we faced, like any organization, with the same problem for our own data from our own business, but mostly because we serve, of course, our customers. We ensure that throughout the entire life cycle of our customers with Expero, we made those data available for our customers so that they can directly, through the customer API, treat Expero just like an additional source of data, an external one, as I talked at the beginning, that they can plug into their own data ocean and start making their own decisions and take their own actions based on the data that Expero makes available for them. We also, also presented it in a way, and we use the same API, the same source of data. We also presented it already in a graphical way to help our customers directly be able to leverage of those information to make decisions. But ultimately, these are the same data, and to ensure that the company can correlate and use the Expero data about their performance of their connectivity and integrate them into their own decision-making for scaling, for pricing, that indeed it facilitates this approach. Now, to finish, I think, again, what I'm also mostly trying to say through this is that the challenge of rolling out data, it's not just a technical exercise, it's very much about how to use data to also start changing the mentality, changing mindsets, and that indeed becoming a data-driven organization, it's mostly about changing culturally how people use and think about data in the organization. I think that's it. That's it for what I wanted to say this morning.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean-Philippe. Let's have a quick look if we have, let's say, in the chat box, some questions coming up from you, or maybe from one of the panelists. I think it seems that everything was absolutely clear, Jean-Philippe, so congrats on that one. And if we have no further questions on your presentation, I would like to kick off the panel. So let's start with introducing all the panelists. And Aiden, if I may ask you to start, please.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Eric, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Aiden Princioglu. I'm a CTO at Odin Solutions. And a little bit about Odin. We're a 17-year-old telco cloud system integrator with a deep focus on tier 1 mobile network functions virtualization. We also own and manage a private cloud infrastructure, enabling PaaS and SaaS offerings for wholesale voice carriers and aggregators, powered by our Orion end-to-end wholesale voice business management suite.
Okay, thank you, Aiden, and great that you could join us all the way from New York. It's very early over there. So let's go to the complete other side, and let's skip Europe for a minute, but let's go to Singapore. Chris.
Hi, Eric. Thanks. Yeah, other side of the world. So end of the day over this side. My name's Chris Hampart-Sumian. I work for Google Cloud. I'm a customer engineer, so I'm helping various enterprises and customers make the most of public cloud infrastructure and Google Cloud services. Of course, we touch all parts of the business, and Google runs on data. The company was born out of downloading the internet and indexing it, and then making the world's data available to all. It's the mission statement. So not only in our services and our products, but everything we do internally is driven by data. Anything from internal surveys to product evaluation. As Jean-Philippe was saying, it's using that data and making great decisions with it. So yeah, delighted to talk about it this morning with you, Eric, and the panel.
Thank you so much, Chris. Let's go to Europe. I think it's Bernard, you're in Paris, correct?
Yes, hello, good morning. Good to see you again, Eric. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to wear a shirt today again. I don't get that opportunity too often these days. Bernard Push from Telstra, again, happy to be on the call. So I think it's an interesting discussion we should have today.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Let's go a bit more up north to Sweden, I presume. Robert, good morning to you.
Hello there. Yeah, Robert Wallen here. I'm a managing director for the telecom sector at Natixis. We are part of the BPC group, which is one of the largest financial institutions in France. In the telecom sector, we are providing anything from M&A advisory to working capital, project finance, corporate finance, bonds, equity support, whatever you want. But for me today, it's all about the telecom and IT. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And let's go immediately into the topic about the digital transformation, because ladies and gentlemen out there, and again, welcome for joining us. This panel explores the challenges and opportunities organizations face when leveraging their data and technology for competitive advantage, of course. So how can we best help to prepare our organizations? And Jean-Philippe mentioned already a couple of points on that one, for the impact of the new technologies. So while using data and analytics, how can we improve the innovative product offering? Actually, that's what we're going to talk about. So let me drop the first one. Jean-Philippe, you mentioned already AI, yeah? So artificial intelligence. So how does AI transform, let's say, the wholesale industry and impact the wholesale fixed data and capacity business models? And while talking about this and while answering that, what do we see? And can you give us a couple of examples, maybe?
I think indeed, historically, of course, the carrier model was very protected, because every carrier, of course, had access to their own pricing and were managing their own data and their own information. What you see, maybe indeed, is a more commoditization of the access, and that it becomes just a commodity. So that means the data becomes more and more aggregated, and it becomes easier and easier some way to compare a carrier and to make broader decisions. And therefore, for indeed, maybe a little bit more flexibility for customers to put in competition different carriers. I think that's the movement that we see at Expero, at least.
Thank you, Jean-Philippe. Talking about carriers, Telstra, Bernard, you've been there so long, and you decide what the strategy is over there. So tell us. What can you tell us?
So look, AI, I mean, it's becoming, I mean, from a wholesale perspective, it's, especially as products are moving more around the cloud, the internet, and IoT, so more data gets collected. So there's opportunity for more services around that. I mean, the simple ones that are using AI, things like some of the security products, are already starting, already been using AI for some time. I think the next areas will be in terms of some of the IoT and in the future 5G type applications, where we've started to use it for some certain applications in Australia. Specifically in terms of cargo, in terms of very hyper-local weather forecasting. So there's all kinds of stuff you can do with AI to, in conjunction with the increased amounts of data that you collect in the network now, and then combine that with the functionalities provided by our colleagues in the cloud, on the cloud businesses, who I'm sure will have a few words to say about this as well. Other applications we've seen it used for internally, we use AI, for instance, we've used it quite successfully for predicting faults with equipment prior to it actually happening, by just collecting statistics, which can be then used to see, you know, potential issues that might happen in the future, and therefore increase the reliability of the network. You know, more and more applications are being found every day as we're moving more into a data-centric organization.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I saw you already sort of reacting on this one. Can you elaborate a little bit on what Bernard just mentioned? Can you give us some nice juicy examples, please?
Sure. Absolutely, Bernard. I agree. AI is nowhere without data. So kind of what's happened, we've been able to collect more and more data as kind of storage got cheaper and the ability to collect more data points became available. You could store, you know, hundreds of thousands of events a second without too much difficulty. And then it comes to processing that data. So you've got kind of, you know, it used to be you look at what happened yesterday or over the previous month, and then you kind of make your assessment from that. But what became available is then you can look at data in real time, so you can see exactly what's happening now rather than what happened yesterday. And then from that, the evolution of kind of data-driven decisions is essentially you can build a machine learning model. And of course, the machine learning model is useless unless you train it. And you can only train a machine learning model with data. And the more data you train it with, the better the model becomes at predicting future events. So you start with all your data collection, you build your model, you train your model, and then you go from looking at what happened yesterday to what's happening now to then being able to predict what's happening in the future. So as Bernard said, we see this in security a little bit ahead of what's happening in networks. So, you know, there's been a lot of network monitoring for a long time, and we have data points on network, but security, we'll take that example first. So you process all the events that happen on your network, hundreds of thousands of events, collect them all, you train a model. This is the good state. So the model knows what the good state is. The moment something changes in your data, your model will say, there's an anomaly in the data. Whatever's happening at that point on the network, that's not your expected behavior. So predicting threat detection and also profiles in attachments and files and all those kind of things. But then the same with networking. And networking is a bit, you know, you can process the volume of data and how that data changes with time of day, with day of week, with season. And then your model will eventually know what your data throughput will look like, not only right now and what was like over the past month, but what it will look like in the future. So it can perhaps predict events on your network that are going to be thresholds that you'll cross. Similarly, network failures. And, you know, we haven't quite got into AI-devised dynamic routing, but that's certainly where we can go. We've got the data, the models are there, and all it is writing a model to apply to that data. And then, you know, I'm not sure that anyone's doing wholesale BGP routing with AI, but it's definitely possible. All you got to do is apply the model to the data.
Yeah, I would argue Xperio to a certain extent does already this with the active routing, the active BGP routing, because we real-time monitor the health of the internet and actively route the package to optimize the connectivity. So in a way, we are already making use of indeed a real-time AI intelligence to affect the routing of our customers.
Absolutely, dynamic routing is a form of kind of optimized routing, and it's that predictive. Actually, another one in load and performance is scaling for network load. So what the cloud kind of, one of the value propositions of the cloud was to scale when your traffic increases. Okay, scale your instances up. And then what happened is, you know, people say things don't scale fast enough. And then what people would do, they would look at traffic profiles across the time of day and across the season or the day of the week. And then they would preemptively scale for traffic, because basically the algorithm will know when the traffic's coming, and it can sort of pre-scale ahead of the traffic coming rather than reacting to the event. It's actually pre-scaling before the event happens. So the difference between dynamic routing and kind of predictive or proactive routing, I guess, and that's where it's going. And we see this kind of technology actually touch everything. So it will come to wholesale, it's come to security, and of course it comes into scaling your compute resources and everything around that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, gentlemen. So Aidan, as a system integrator, how did AI transform, let's say, your wholesale, proposition, and what did you do? What did you see is currently actually happening in the within the transformation of the wholesale industry? Maybe you have a couple of examples.
Sure. Honestly, we're more focused on the voice side, and I mean, AI, I think, is a lot more prevalent with operators, especially MNOs, and they can use it in a wide variety of areas. But on the wholesale domain, I agree with the other gentleman. I think the networking side, optimizing there is important. Things like predictive analysis, network optimization, predictive maintenance. On our side, we are in our wholesale management suite, we are using machine learning. I mean, it's a subset of AI for creating, optimized voice routing and making recommendations to our platform owners.
Okay, cool. Now, Robert, you always overlooking the complete market and having or telling us often by analyzing and giving us, let's say, a complete helicopter view about the market. What do you see happening with in relation to AI and AI transforming the wholesale industry? What do you see?
Well, I mean, I think on the telecom industry, what we are seeing is that operators, large and small, are becoming more and more efficient, of course, with their resources. And we can see the vendor side is also, catching on this and starting working less on selling more gear, regardless of the efficient use of it, and getting more wiser in promoting solutions and ideas that will make the operators more efficient. And there is a lot of demand on that. Yes, if you want to sell me something, how much can I save by buying what you're trying to sell to me, whether it is software or hardware or combinations of the two that will make the network more efficient. And network management, whether it is fiberized or wireless, becomes far more of an exercise of forward thinking and planning when you're doing sales. And of course, the information that is being collected by the operators as well as the vendors, because in many cases the vendors have full access into the network management, either because the operator has externalized that service, or one of the driving forces, I would argue, in terms of people starting to realize that data can be used for good and data can be used for not so good. And when we're talking about not so good, we can look at, for example, how AI or computer learning has come into the financial sector. So if you look at banks and other actors in the financial market, credit card companies, etc., there you can see that there is a online tracking in terms of how monies are being moved around, who is sending, who is receiving, is it an unusual amount? I mean, back when you would suddenly learn that your credit card had been blocked because last month or something like that, there was some suspicious use of the credit card in some God-forgotten place. And but today, if there is something unusual, you receive a phone call within minutes and which is just showing that it's not the person there checking your credit card, but there is the machine who's noticing that there's something unusual. And just an example, if you live in the south of Spain and you are in Spain shopping near Gibraltar, and then you go over to Gibraltar and have a cold beer, and then you go back and fill your petrol on the Spanish side, and suddenly you receive a call from American Express saying that, sir, you have been in UK, Spain, and you can back in within a minute. How is that possible? And that kind of AI is there. But money laundering is a big issue. Tracking monies is a big issue. And we can see that the financial sector is getting wiser and wiser. When we look at how we, or as a bank, how are we be able to use big data to be wiser in our decision process? Well, there we have a little bit of an issue when it comes to sort of regulatory oversight and keeping information about our clients confidential. Because if you have, for example, bankers who are following the telecom sector, they are working with all the operators. If each person knows absolutely everything that is going on with each and every one of the operators, that is a little bit of a problem. So whilst it's nice to be able to share data to make wiser decisions, it's also then extremely important, particularly in our sector, to keep that data anonymized and make it sure that it is not being abused because someone is making a move on the other bank, other institution, and we can then be caught in the middle there with too much information on both sides of the equation.
Okay, thank you. And Robert, I had that use case, so that example of American Express calling me. I was traveling from Cape Town to Dubai. The next day I was on a flight to Singapore and then back to Frankfurt. And they didn't believe me. I did this in 5 days. And they called me already in Singapore, in your country where you are now, Chris. Sir, is it you? Is it correct? Is it so? Yeah. After 5 minutes, it was done and unblocked. But so I had this use case. Absolutely, I know how that feels. So Jean-Philippe, clearly Asperio, SD1, and next generation software-defined technologies are reshaping and industry and changing the networks. So can you maybe name us some changes, some examples, and actually, why is the reshaping actually so necessary? I mean, we tipped it on it, but maybe you can go a bit more in deep.
Yeah, maybe to make the link to your initial question, the way we see it at Experio, I mean, AI indeed has a lot of application, but where we see for us, it helps us to make a more prediction about the underlay, so for the carrier. But because we see indeed that the underlay just becomes a matter of reliability and pricing. And that indeed we can use data and predictability to select the underlay, but it is because indeed the logic is moving to the overlay. This is where, the introduction of software-defined network indeed transforms the way to provide connectivity, and how indeed the commodity of the last mile or the access is mostly shaped by now this overlay and all this logic that has been moving away from individual router and boxes and carriers to a more centralized management, and that is the whole SD1 trend that we certainly see very clearly at Experio.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. Chris, jump in. What do you see happening, and what do you see in the reshaping, and why is it actually that important and necessary, even if you can say? One of you, just bump in. Bernard.
So, look, I mean, we've been investing in SDN for some time. I mean, we saw it as an opportunity to when having a lot of capacity in the Asia Pacific region, we saw the opportunity for more rapid deployment of capacity, more flexible deployment, similar basically getting the capacity business a little bit more aligned with the way that the cloud business works, in as much as being able to spin up capacity for short periods of time, being able to move stuff around quickly, as opposed to the kind of more long-term contract structure that we're maybe used to in the wholesale and in the telco business, to adapt to the new world. We've seen the value of that when last year in March, some companies had to spin up a network very, very quickly to deal with 7 billion people suddenly working from home or whatever. SDN has been quite important in that space. Going forward, I can see it probably being more also important in 5G applications, for instance, where you're having to integrate some of the overlay much more closely with the network and potentially adapt much more quickly. So I think there's potential to grow that even further. But we've seen people interacting with our orchestration from an API level in some cases. Probably the early adopters right now, but I think that's gonna grow over time as well.
Okay, thank you. Chris, you want to add something to it?
Sure. At Google, it's probably 12, 14 years of pretty much an entirely software-defined network. And it's actually really a lot about the speed and the flexibility, not the speed of the network, but the speed of provisioning and configuration. So anything from the Jupyter Fabric in the data center, kind of multi-terabit into zone software-defined network fabric within the DC, and then within the fabric, the virtual machines that we run, all the services, they use something called Andromeda, which is the software-defined network stack on all the hosts. There's no NICs. We don't have any NICs. You can't get a NIC speed. You get the speed of the edge network on the fabric that you're on. And then even outside the data center, you get to the metros and the Google Global Network. It's an Anycast network. The Google Load Balancer is software-defined. You kind of click a few things and it deploys in 144 POPs around the world. There is no scale. There's no device. There's no appliance. And it's just a case of provisioning, and not having to provision hardware or configuration. It's you can deploy service, and then that kind of that is now literally extending to SD-WAN. So the data center, and then the edge, and then the global network. And when we spoke other times, Eric, there's the subsea network that Google's investing with Telstra and with some of the people here on this call. Then being able to set up what would have been point to point from anywhere in the world over an existing software-defined network. So you can get an interconnect into Singapore and an interconnect into US West 2, and then you've got the equivalent of an MPLS circuit by just adding the two spokes and then transitive routing. So we were able to bring that to market because everything is software defined. It was actually a software configuration to make SD-WAN into a product on the already software defined Google network. So it's speed and agility.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now, Aiden, let's dive a bit deeper. And improving network interoperability and provisioning for new software-defined networks, SDN, NFV. What do we need to look at, or what do we need to look out for?
Yeah, I mean, the standards are there for SDN and disaggregation, but I think the thing to look out for really is testing, and just more testing and validating in a lab, and then automating it as much as possible, and automating the testing as well. While doing this, you need to embrace the CI/CD delivery pipelines, Again, more testing and validation. And I think also look into the evolution of intent-based networking, which sort of builds on SDN and uses AI and machine learning to add in more automation and less manual configuration and less human error.
Okay, cool. Jean-Philippe?
Yeah, I was thinking indeed, the thing to look at for us, we see, I think Bernard mentioned indeed, the early adoption of APIs. I think Chris indeed really stressed out the speed at which you can provision. Aileen, I refer to the use of network for specific use like VoIP. What we think indeed we need to look at for is the standardization about the protocol to facilitate indeed a standard way to provision those services around. I think a little bit like the method did the effort for Ethernet a long time ago to standardize it. We see that they need the same game playing where there are early adopters, there are early, let's say, a proposal of standards for that provisioning, but it will need to consolidate into an industry standard, and it needs to not be controlled by, let's say, necessarily a central body, but maybe adopted by a wider industry, so that indeed we can facilitate this interoperability and really give the power to customer to really provision left and right, and have that flexibility to really leverage this speed of being able to spin off new access and new connectivity.
Okay, thank you. Now, moving on, because one part is, let's say, the new business strategies, and Robert, maybe we can I can start with you. So new business strategies plus the models of it, and the new technologies are actually reshaping products and services. Can you say something about it? What do you see?
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, if we for a moment put, shall we say, the traditional telcos aside, and if we consider that the infrastructure providers, either whether they are providing fiber or towers or data centers, that they are, shall we say, operating more or less efficient as they are. What is, shall we say, the next step in this evolution? And what we're talking about here is automation and artificial intelligence and whatnot. And what we are seeing from our tech investors and IT investors is an increased interest, saying that, okay, the infrastructure game is now a crowded place. There is a lot of investment funds, there are a lot of high wealth individuals who are deploying capital into this segment, so that we can see that there is plenty of interest in building the infrastructure. So shall we say the funds that are more at the forefront of what is happening, they are now starting to look at applications, software applications predominantly into artificial intelligence and the automation of networks as the next shall we say investment wave that is coming. And we're on a call yesterday where one of the firms, they were saying that, well, we don't want to invest anything in small amounts of money. We 100 million, 200 million, that's what we consider being a valuable investment into software developments. And this is developments for the future. We're not talking about a new PayPal or anything like that. It's definitely moving very quickly. And where we see the interest, it's security, cybersecurity software. It's again, since I'm in the financial sector, it's a lot of monitoring of flows of funds and going in different directions, and a lot of optimization in network software. Optimization of network is very, very hot at the moment, largely because the amounts of data that are being stored in data centers around the world, because of data protection now being enacted country after country. There needs to be communication between all these things to update the data so that one server is having more or less the same, level of new information as the other. And the traffic flows are absolutely incredible. the bottlenecks are being found faster and faster, and what we are seeing is a humongous investment in the infrastructure, and this software is there to sort of optimize it so that we are not suddenly finding that we have 5 highways to roam with. So it's very important.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Now, how can companies actually prepare themselves? I mean, for the digital age we're actually in, and I know it's quite generic, but Chris, what new structures or even cultures do we see currently? What can you tell us?
I think that's probably to touch on what Robert said and what Jean-Philippe said just before that. What's happened, there's been a proliferation of hardware and compute and network. And now what's happening is what people are doing with that in software, to the point that really software is what's eating the world. And as Robert's saying there, with data. So you take all the data that you can collect, you use software to make data-driven decisions. And these are the things that are differentiating businesses and making the difference between one company moving faster than the other, because they've used data and they've used software to know where either the market's going or where their business is going or where the opportunity is. And you know, the network and the compute and the physical part just naturally kind of grows and supports that. So I think the trends are looking at software-defined WAN. We see, you know, whereas WAN was a connectivity thing before, now it's a software thing, and using data, because data is enabling companies to make informed decisions instead of using just the intuition. Using intuition is still valuable, but backed by data. So data and software as we move that way. And I think Jean-Philippe made that point in his opening address, really, that it's how do you transform your business to be data-driven and make such decisions.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So Bernard at Telstra, how did you prepare yourself and for the digital age and all the transformations which came and is still there to come, because we're on the forefront of it? How did Telstra move, let's say, and worked around with the new structures and cultures?
So look, yeah, we like most carriers have had to make quite a big move. Obviously, you know, the efficiency of the organization has been key. So automation of many of the processes and becoming more flexible in terms of automation of implementation of services, trying to simplify products. But also there's opportunities in terms of you know, some of the new technologies we're implementing to add some intelligence on top. So in terms, you know, IoT, for instance, we've worked with many of our customers locally to provide more than just the connectivity, but also some of that AI that sits on top, which gives more value to our customers. And then also, yeah, just the agility, creating the ability for the organization to be more agile, because you know, telcos in the past maybe not noted for their flexibility, and really in the new world that's going to be paramount, because things, as we've seen, are changing so rapidly that a organization that is too rigid is going to have difficulty reacting to that quickly enough, and so the organizations have to be more flexible, more open, more, and that's maybe what's also driving the requirement to have more multicultural teams, people from different environments working together, more global. It's becoming pretty important to have that culture of openness in telco as well, I think, which drives more flexibility and a more open thinking, which is what we need, I think.
So are you also saying unify a bit more?
Unify.
Unifying.
I mean, it's just. I mean, that's one of the things I like about telco is the fact that it's such a global kind of business, and but I think that also gives it value. That brings a lot of value because you're working with people who look at the world from different angles, and the internet is global, and you can't just look at it from one part of the world or one. Even us. I mean, I'm taking input from my son on, what's the newest game update coming up, because that can have a huge impact on the internet. And I have no idea when the next version of Fortnite is going to come out, to be perfectly frank with you. But it's actually pretty damn important, right?
I couldn't tell you either because too old for that.
yeah, we run into that one as well. Game patches. It's incredible the number of people who play a game, and when the new patch comes out, they all want some network.
No.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised how many people play these games and download the patches. It's a lot.
No, absolutely. Okay, gentlemen. Aiden, future.
Oh.
Yeah, there we go. But it's always one of my favorite questions. You know why? Because I would always like to see, talk about what's out there, what's going on, what will hit us. And by the end of the day, we have a zillion or trillion ideas. And by the end of the day, not that many will really come through and will dictate business models, our life. I'm talking about Fortnite, of course, and other stuff. So, Aiden, can you give us a glimpse of, let's say, how what you see with Odin Solutions as a system integrator? What can you expect? What do you see?
Yeah, as per my previous comments, it's a tough one. I mean, as we saw with the case of the pandemic, it's really difficult to predict what the future is going to bring. So I'm not sure if I want to try to predict it, but what I can add, and I think it ties in very nicely with the topic of this panel, is telcos and all companies need to continue with their digital transformation, and including the AI, ML piece, the big data, the analytics, and migrate or maximize the amount of infrastructure that's on NFV and SDN, and that should position them well for whatever the future brings. Yeah. So
okay, no, cool. Jean-Philippe, I mean, the word SDN fell, of course, and we know let's say how big and huge actually Xperia grew, especially over the last year. So that being part of, let's say, just of the past, and then probably for the future to come for Xperia as well. But how do you see, let's say, within the topic on the AI, the transformation, the digital transformation, what do you see coming?
Like to actually just step back and on the comment of Bernard, because now thinking indeed about maybe indeed the organization that indeed historically have been a bit stable, and talking about the future, thinking indeed about this need to create maybe more incubator or spin-off or like smaller groups that indeed you maybe give them much more leeway, much more freedom to experiment with those new technologies, to start really be at the forefront, but without having the burden to right away convince the entire organization to change it. So indeed, I mean, what's hitting us in the future, I don't know. Indeed, I hope not another pandemic for sure. But when it comes to this, is we don't know what's going to come. what we can only do is to be more prepared to indeed quickly adapt and to create those maybe smaller group within the organization that are able to indeed be more freely experiment and so maybe at the forefront to feel and taste what's coming. I think that's what will help a lot of the companies to maybe see it coming a little bit earlier and be able indeed to feel what is coming and what's going to hit them or hit us in the future.
Okay, thank you. Well, sometimes for this is a bit more freedom and playing around. Not all the companies they have, let's say, the finance to it. So let's bridge this immediately to Robert, because he's the man with the deep pockets. No, but maybe you want to
well, I see.
Look at it.
I see two things that has been brought on by the pandemic that will change our future a little bit. One is, shall we say, an element that we don't necessarily appreciate, all of us, which is everybody wants to know more about where everybody is and who they have met recently, and that is going to be interesting to see how different countries will be, shall we say, put in the big government as a part of the big data. So I think we will see a lot of developments there on information flow on people's whereabouts that may not be particularly wanted by everyone in the world. That's, shall we say, the big brother element. On the positive side, I see a lot of and lost my train of thought there for a moment. I can see a lot of improvements in the way that we are all working. I can see how more of us will be able to work from home, perhaps in the smaller groups that people can team up and you're going to work on a particular app or a particular situation, etc. And it will not be necessary to find a location to do that, but it's going to be natural and automatic for all of us. Or let's open up a spot for ourselves here where we can work. And that, I think, is going to change finance quite significantly, because a lot of real estate can be repurposed. In where I am at the moment, there are already offices being repurposed into housing. And that I can see is a trend that is going to accelerate, particularly in towns and cities where perhaps there is, a little bit of high cost of accommodation. So I see that as a positive trend. People are being able to work more freely wherever they happen to be, creating colleagues around the web in a different manner than we have done in the past. So I see that and that will free up capital, of course, to more telecom investments, which is a good thing in my opinion.
I'll keep you to it. I'll keep you to it, Robert. So Bernard, how do you see the future? What can you tell us?
I mean, what Robert was saying is kind of interesting, because I mean, it's also something that we've experienced in our own business and in our home markets. So office space is very expensive in city centers, and I think companies have realized that maybe they can manage that more effectively going forward. And there are opportunities with IoT, for instance, to manage office space more intelligently, and even with AI applications on top of that to work to manage office spaces in large cities much more effectively. Because I think what's going to happen is a lot of people have experienced the working at home, and that's kind of changed people's attitudes a bit to work. That doesn't mean that everyone wants to work at home going forward, but what it does mean is that I think it's going to be a more flexible environment going forward. that drives opportunities potentially for applications, and building management is something that we've put quite a lot of effort into, for instance. In terms of other areas of telco, I don't see any let up in the general trend towards more bandwidth utilization, using data more actively in terms of building networks. For instance, on-net buildings lists and that kind of stuff is going to become really important, because as bandwidth is required to scale quite rapidly, it's important to know who's actually on net at particular sites and who isn't, right? Which previously wasn't really a major question that carriers asked themselves. So there's a lot more you can do with data in the carrier environment, and there are opportunities for more flexibility. And I mean, the other thing that's going to change, I guess, is the whole. I think 5G could actually could change. Is likely to open up new opportunities that we haven't yet thought about. So we've got to also remain very flexible. With a guiding principle that the bandwidth is probably going to continue to increase, but then leave ourselves open to being flexible, because as the last year has shown, things can change really, really rapidly.
Even if you don't see it coming, right?
Even if you don't see it coming, and some of the things you cannot see coming, unfortunately. Yeah.
Exactly. And so last but not least, gentlemen, from Google, Chris, you always have something nice to tell about the future, and maybe you have some scoops which we do not know yet, and if not, then please take us a little bit on the journey. What do you and Google see for the future, or what do you foresee?
Sure. I'll try not to reveal anything I'm not supposed to. But actually picking up on a number of the points made: software, network, how we work, where we are, what we're doing, and where's it going. And this might sound strange coming from the cloud person, but something that touches all of those is it's beyond the cloud, I call it in my head. So, we've gone from centralized computing in the mainframe to distributed computing in the PC at the home, connected by the network, back to kind of centralization back into the cloud, and, these massive data centers with huge amounts of connectivity. And as we say, things are getting faster and faster. And what I think it's the decentralization. Strange coming from the person who's kind of in the cloud business, but the cloud's not going to go away. But this is mobile edge computing, and it touches on Robert's point on 5G and on the edge bandwidth and the wholesale supporting all of that. So you kind of get the compute move back out to the edge and be even in the cell towers and in the telco core, backed by cloud computing. But instead of centralizing everything in these, maybe 20 or 30 data centers, massively distributed compute, 5G enabled MEC, mobile edge computing. And I mean, it's a little way off, but it touches on all of those points, on bandwidth and on compute and on software and on speed as well. So, what are you going to run in 5G MEC? I don't know, but it'll be in software. So as long as you've got a good, fast software pipeline and you've got compute place to run it, and backed by the cloud and backed by a network and backed by subsea, someone will come up with some very, very smart ideas for things to do in software. And then as a telco, you can run that close to your users and or in the cloud. So I think that probably touches on most people's business here. So that's what I think we're going that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Jean-Philippe, you want to comment on that quickly? Or does it tell us this says it all?
No, yeah, indeed, it says it all. Like, really, indeed, we also see more and more, indeed, this edge computing, also, indeed, how to bring it in more and more of this computing capacity to the edge, and how, indeed, it is enabled, indeed, by also this flexibility of SD-WAN, and this flexibility to still keep control of your network, while, indeed, having stuff, I would say, all over the place. So indeed, it's all linked.
Okay,
I concur.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Philippe. So, ladies and gentlemen, it seems that we're heading towards the end of this session. We run a little bit out of time, but with these gentlemen around the table, we keep on talking. So, but we need to come to an end, and I would like to thank the keynote speaker, Jean-Philippe Avalanche, from and the sponsor of this session, Experio, for your participation and giving the interesting presentation. So thank you for this. Also would like to thank Chris, Bernard, Robert, and Aiden for being the panelist today. And for me, ladies and gentlemen, it's now to give back the microphone to my colleagues back in the studio in Berlin. So ciao for now. See you next time and stay tuned. Over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks. Bye.
Dear all, we are at the end of this webinar session, and I would like to thank our keynote speaker, Jean-Philippe, for his interesting presentations, our panelists for sharing their knowledge. Also, thank you to our audience for participating and listening. This panel will be soon available on CC Media portal for you to watch. We are looking forward to welcoming you in our future branded webinars. For more information, contact CC team. If you're interested in supporting and sponsoring one of our future branded webinars, also please contact us. For all fresh updates and content, follow us on our 4 social media channels. Also subscribe to our Telegram channel for exclusive invitations to our upcoming CC Webinar Live sessions. Stay safe and bye for now. Goodbye.